And the recording is in progress. So again, let me just welcome you if you're here live or if you're watching later on. My name's James and I'm part of Laneway Church. It's so great to explore anxiety together, to open up some conversations, to understand a bit more about what it's all about for ourselves and for those around us. And we want to do this from a perspective of thinking about according to God and according to medicine. And I guess helping us to see that those two things are not in conflict. But as we go through the night, I hope that it'll be a fantastic evening for us all. Well, look, why are we doing this? Maybe it's obvious to you, but if it's not, I think the last couple of months, dare I say, year and a half or so, has been times of heightened anxiety. Going into lockdowns and now coming out of lockdown, there's this re-entry anxiety as we kind of learn to live post-lockdown life. For some of us, there's a little bit of anxiety. For some of us, there's a lot. For some of us, it's been very specific to COVID and lockdown life. For some of us, it's gone on much longer and affected us for a great number of years. So this could be an all of life thing or a lockdown thing. This might be you're here because you're feeling anxious yourself or you want to help others who are feeling anxious. But whatever your reason, it's great to have you along. You're really welcome. It is fair to say, as you know from the title, according to God and medicine, that we're coming from a Christian perspective. It doesn't matter if you are or aren't. I think you're going to get heaps out of the night. But it's fair to say that as the speakers share their opinions, share their ideas, that where each of us are coming from a Christian worldview. So we'll be hearing a little bit from a few of us through the night. We hope that through tonight, we can all better identify and understand the anxieties that are going on within us and also around us, in people around us. That we'll be better at learning how to manage these anxieties for ourselves and for others, but also to increase conversations around anxiety. So the way that that's going to look tonight is shortly I'll hand over to Rick. He's one of the pastors at Laneway Church, and he's going to share from the book of Matthew in the Bible, and we're going to hear some biblical input about what Jesus says about anxiety. I'll be sharing some of my personal experience and my relationship with anxiety over way too many years. And the main part of our time will be spent hearing from Sarah. So Sarah Allen is a GP and sharing some of her insights and understandings from a medical perspective, but also as she's worked with many patients with mental health issues. We'll wrap up by 8:30, and then there's some time if you want to linger for Q&A as well. But if you want to take off at 8:30, we'll be done by then. So with all that said, I might just hand straight over to Rick, and he's going to share a bit from the Bible for us.
Thanks, James. Yeah, as James said, my name's Rick. I'm one of the pastors here at Laneway Church, and I just want to add how thankful I am that each of you want to think about anxiety. And as James said, it's unsurprising in lots of ways that so many of us this hits personally or for those around us, because in some sense, I want to suggest anxiety is common to all of us, more or less. For some of us will feel that much more strongly. For some of us, it will be a lighter experience, and we may have experienced more in the last year, 2 years, but all of us to some degree wrestle with anxieties. And it's common because we're all human. And as humans, we're vulnerable. We're not as strong often as we like to think we are. And often we're not as strong as we hope we are. And anxiety is common to all of us because at its heart, anxiety is fear. It's fear. And we all fear things. Now, sometimes when we talk about fears, when we talk about phobias, we're often thinking about fears that seem irrational. But some are very rational, and lots of our anxieties fall into that category. And it's inevitable that we're going to have rational anxiety and fear because we know, even if we don't think about it, we know intuitively how frail and vulnerable we are in so many ways. And Jesus knew that. Jesus knew that. Jesus taught, and we have in the Bible, Jesus teaching about lots of different topics. But tonight we're going to see just briefly some of the things that Jesus said about anxiety in particular. And when Jesus taught, he wanted us to understand ourselves, the world, and God. And when he taught it from God's perspective. And so the part of Jesus' teaching that we're going to look at tonight if you see in the chat, there's a bit of a handout. And so if you don't have your own Bible, feel free to open that and you'll be able to see the section we'll be reading tonight. Also, if you're joining us and you don't own your own Bible, there'll be a connect form that pops into the chat as well. Let us know some details and we'd love to get you a Bible. We'd love you to be able to read more of what Jesus says for yourself after this. But I'm going to be reading, as James said, from Matthew chapter 6. And the part that we see there, it's just a small part of what Jesus taught. But if you're new to hearing from Jesus, can I encourage you, listen to what he says. This isn't the sort of wise teachings that we might pick up in a nice book. There's profound wisdom in what Jesus says. And there's wisdom because Jesus knows the human heart. He knows your heart and he knows your mind and your fears. Jesus knows you. And he has comfort to give, but it's maybe not the comfort that we expect. And so tonight from here, we're going to see a little bit about why we feel our anxieties and the comfort we can have in them. So I'm going to be reading from Matthew, chapter 6. And as I said, if you've got that handout, you'll see it there starting at verse or the little number 25. So Matthew chapter 6, starting at verse 25. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Now, that part that Jesus said, it might sound simple, but as I said, Jesus deeply knows the human heart. And he has truths there that show us why we feel our anxieties, our fears, and the comfort we can have in them. And the reason that we have our anxieties that Jesus says there is because we have needs. Notice the things that Jesus says there aren't worries, anxieties that are simple, that would be very easy to dismiss. No, the anxieties are about real things that we all would fear losing. Things like food to eat, water to drink, clothes to wear. It's very rational. It is right to fear not having a roof over our heads or enough money to buy food for our families. Many of us fear not having that person around us or having people around us. And we fear not having our own lives. We fear lots of things. There are real significant needs there. What is it that your heart fears the most? What is it that you are anxious to lose? Jesus knows those fears and he knows your heart. But Jesus doesn't just know them, he has an answer for them. He says that you can have a comfort in the midst of those fears because God made you. God made you and he cares for you. I'm going to just read the verse 26 there again. Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or stow away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? God created us. He created the birds and the grass and the flowers, but we are much more valuable in God's eyes than any of those things. You are much more valuable than any of those things. God cares for you. And he shows us that love that he has for you in all of those things. In any of those good things that we've received are just an overflow of God's love for you. And we see that even more in Jesus himself and in the Bible. The second piece of wisdom, and I think this is something that we've picked up in our culture, is something that Jesus says just after that. Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? We know, and I think we've picked up from Jesus here, that worrying in itself often doesn't actually accomplish much. I know for myself, when I'm feeling anxious and I'm worrying about things, I have this ironic comfort maybe in actually feeling the worry, that I think it's doing something for me. It's not. The best it's doing is distracting me from actually being able to do anything. But you could hear, I don't know if you've experienced this, but you are wrestling with a deep fear or anxiety and someone just dismisses it. They just say, just don't worry about it. It's fine. That's not what Jesus is doing here. It could sound like it, but Jesus knows you deeply, and that's not the sort of attitude Jesus has to our cares and our fears. That's not Jesus. Jesus shows us that he feels real grief and pain at the loss of friends, at injustice, and even at the pain of his own death. Jesus feels things, and he's not being dismissive here. But he is reminding us, giving us real wisdom to know that we can't actually accomplish anything by our worries, our anxieties. There is, and Sarah will be able to go into this more, but there is actually real benefits, real fruit from our anxieties if we approach them correctly, but just worrying about things often doesn't accomplish anything. As much as we fear, often it's right to fear losing those things, Jesus says that there is something actually much more significant about your life. I'll read verse 25 again, or just the second half of it. Is not your life more than food, and the body more than clothes? It's a right fear that many of us will have of losing those things and many more things that I haven't even slightly touched on. But Jesus is saying there's actually a part of us which none of those fears are talking into. There's something deeper that we should fear that often we don't. And the thing that we should fear is not living knowing God, not living knowing God, not living our lives as God had intended them. And the way that Jesus phrased that, you might have heard it there, is God's kingdom. God's kingdom is simply that. It's life lived as God wanted us to live it. Living knowing who God is. And so Jesus says that the answer to our greatest need is to actually seek after that. Seek after God's kingdom, to look for a life lived knowing God and knowing that love that he has for us. Verse 33, seek first his kingdom. Now, there's lots of questions that may come up for you with that, and I'd love for you to be able to ask some of those in the question and answer. We don't have time for them because we've got a lot to go through tonight. But Jesus is giving us there a taste of what true freedom means. True freedom from our anxieties means not necessarily that we don't feel anxieties of other things, and we'll go into that more in a moment, but it means that we can know that we are living life knowing God, the God that deeply cares for you, and that one day we could know that there'll be a time with no anxieties, And God offers that out to us. Jesus is offering that out to us here. There's far more that we could say. But tonight, can I encourage you to listen to Jesus? He knows you. He knows your deepest fears, and he has the most satisfying answers. I'm going to hand over to James, and he'll talk a little bit about what this has looked like and anxieties in general from his own experience.
Thank you, Rick. Yeah, thanks for sharing that and reminding us of the heart of Jesus in all that. Before I share about some of my own journey, I wanted to also just mention that as we do close the night later on, we want to make sure as much as possible that everyone feels like safe and they have any next steps that they need to take. So, you know, there'll be some contacts that you can follow up on. There'll be the Connect card posted again if you want to talk to someone at church. We want to provide options for you if any of this is unsettling, or even if you just have more questions that aren't answered tonight. But in terms of questions for tonight, gee, that was a nice little segue, wasn't it? For questions for tonight, as we go through, feel free to either pop them in the chat if you're happy to do that publicly. You might want to make some comments or questions that way, or you can send them directly to me. So just find me, James Cox, and send a direct message to me. But we'll sort of try to tackle as many of them as we can at the back end of the evening. So hopefully that makes sense and you kind of have a feeling of, just a bit of safety and where we're going. Let me share a bit about, I guess, my experience with anxiety, and I want to do that in 3 parts. How it affects me, what has helped, and why, for me, why God must be part of the equation. So there's a lot I could say about how it affects me. I've heard a quote that says, to be alive is to be anxious. And to some degree, that's true. But I'm going to hone in not just on general life, but on the last 10 years where I've looked at anxiety quite seriously in my life, received a lot of counselling for it, working through different thought patterns and so on. And even in the last 5 years of my life, where I've been on medication for the anxiety. 5 years. I remember when I started it, I thought it'd just be a couple of months. And here we are 5 years on. But what does it look like for me? Well, with any kind of mental health issue, anxiety is the same. It affects thoughts. So, you know, our thinking and our minds. It affects feelings and emotions. It affects our bodies. And it affects our behavior. And what I've noticed when I think about the most prevalent symptoms of anxiety that I've experienced, they're in the body. So they're physical ones. So, you know, an obvious example is sleep. And I'm sure we've all had a lot of sleepless nights, or some over the last 18 months. When will this lockdown end? Will I lose my job? Will a friend of mine get sick from COVID? Who knows what it's been? But for me, it's not that my mind is going overtime. It's that my body is tight and tense. I wake up often through the night with what feels like jolts of electricity coming through my body, which I think is adrenaline. I think it's just my body, just all this energy going through. So when I wake up in the morning, I feel tight and tired before we've even started the day. I have sore muscles. And that's not helped by, I notice when I'm driving, I clench the steering wheel really tightly. When I'm eating, I really rush my food. So I get sore bodily that way as well. Hopefully this is not TMI, but I need to go to the toilet heaps more when I'm highly anxious. But in all seriousness, sometimes I get shaky, I get dizzy. Once I fell over in the kitchen because I was just so dizzy. Lots of physical symptoms, heart racing and so on. And I just want to say it sucks. Like, I hate it. It really sucks. And these are just the physical symptoms, or some of them. And in sharing this, I don't want to kind of be sooky about it, like poor me, but I also don't want to be stoic and just shrug my shoulders and go, well, get over it and get on with it, James. Hopefully I can land somewhere in the middle. And for my experience, sustained periods of anxiety also lead into depression, which is pretty common for a lot of people, but it's certainly my case as well. Unfortunately, anxiety and depression, they're kind of like friends. They can coexist quite easily. So I said I wouldn't just say how it affects me, but what helps. And my question often is, well, where is God in this? And probably in a world first, I'm going to compare God to Rihanna, the singer, under the umbrella. Ella, Ella, eh, eh. Okay, except now it's really dark, isn't it? Under this umbrella, it's like God is giving me these gifts of things that I can draw on to help manage anxiety. You can see community there. You can see the Bible. You can see medication. You can see helping others. And I've also got on here physical things, so like exercise and so on. Reflection. The fact that I can even self-reflect, that's a gift from God. Prayer and psychology, seeing a psychologist. There's 8 little stems here with 8 things that help. Hopefully you can see that one there. Nope. There we go. Now, I'm not saying these are 8 different types of strategies. There's so much more than that. These are only some of the gifts that God gives me to manage anxiety. They all work together. They're certainly not pitted against each other. And I just want to touch on a few of them. And maybe I'll start with the meds first, because look, let's be honest, there's always a bit of weirdness for a lot of people around taking medication. And particularly if you associate with Christians, or if you associate as a Christian or a part of the church, then we've got our own version of some of these weird views like, well, I'll just trust God to sustain me and I don't need the medication. Now, for me, I got to the point where that would be like saying, well, I'll just trust God and I don't need sleep this week and I won't worry about drinking water for the next month. Like, they don't stop me from trusting God to sustain me, just like getting sleep isn't an expression of not trusting God to sustain me. So they've been helpful. And I think that medication is a gift from God. They're not the savior, but they're certainly not the enemy either. Let me touch on a few others. Helping others. This keeps my focus away from me, and that's not a bad thing sometimes. Just having to get up every day and look after my family is really important, and helping others has been proven to lift people's moods, and it certainly does for me. Physical things, obviously exercise is great, and gosh, I need to exercise a lot because my body is full of stress and energy. But also things like trying to avoid alcohol, trying to limit my caffeine intake, because they're the type of things that just aggressively go after the parts of my brain that are trying to reduce my anxiety. The caffeine and the alcohol are working aggressively to stop them from working. So I need to be careful about what I do, what I eat, what I drink, and so on and so forth. I love that I've got lots of self-reflection tools. I love praying. The Bible, it reminds me that this isn't how God intended it. The big picture of the Bible is that it started all good and then it all got messed up, and God's made it all good and it will be awesome again. And that this anxiety and my experiences are not what it was intended to be in the beginning. The Bible has also been amazing, where I go to like Psalm 13. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? Why do I have to wrestle with my anxious thoughts? And I often go out into the garage and shout those out to God. And I dare say I throw in some other naughty words, some swear words. I think God can handle it. But I'm just like, I take the words of the Bible and I use them in prayer, and I hold on to promises like that I don't need to worry about tomorrow, because tomorrow will worry about itself, just like we heard in Matthew 6. But I love just the truth in the Bible is yet another one of God's gifts of grace that helps to manage anxiety. And psychology, it's great. There's so much good in it. It's really helped me to tackle things like some of my perfectionism, worrying about what people think of me, really to challenge some of these fundamental mindsets that I carry. Psychology, like a lot of these other things, is great, but limited. And it's just a good reminder. I'm all for this. If you need to go and see a psychologist, go nuts, go and do it. But psychology has its limits, and I've realized that too over the years. I love what I've learned from it, but it really has its limits. And this is why I say that God has to be part of the equation when it comes to me and working with my anxiety. God has to be part of the equation, because where psychology or my exercise or my eating habits are limited, God is unlimited. He has no limits. Just think about this. God, who has unlimited knowledge about how people work, about how I work, about what I need right now, what's really going on under the surface. And God doesn't just have unlimited knowledge about that, but wisdom without limits. So he knows what to do. God is this ultimate counselor who can respond to his clients' needs 100% the best way, 100% of the time. And amazingly, this wisdom is coupled with unlimited goodness. There's this promise in Jeremiah that God says he will never stop doing good to those who trust in Jesus. He's talking about the time to come after Jeremiah. I will never stop doing good to you is a promise from God. And I love that this wisdom is taking the 200 million billion year view. God's not just sorting out my day-to-day struggles, but this wisdom has a long-term timeline in mind. He's not treating me as my selfishness deserves. He's not treating me like my weakness deserves, but he's working my life towards this perfect future where there is no more anxiety, where there's no more crying or tears or pain, no COVID, no need for vaccinations, no lockdowns, no sickness or sadness, no tense muscles, and no need for medication. That's a real hope that gives me peace right now. And so that's just a little snapshot into what I live with and how I live. Perfect hope alongside panicky moments. Jesus's peace and sweaty palms. I've got a brain that doesn't function that well, and sometimes it doesn't function at all. But with a certain knowledge that these things don't disqualify me from being loved and known and accepted by this unlimited God. So like I said, that's just a snapshot, but it definitely gives you a bit of a picture into my life with anxiety and how Jesus is all part of it. Like I said earlier, this might be sparking off some questions, or even some things might be hitting a bit close to home. But as I said, we'll share some ideas of where to from here towards the end. But I do want to handball now to Sarah Allen, who's a GP, and she's going to take us through the rest of the time, or most of it. And again, if you've got questions, if you've got comments, keep popping them in the chat or send them to me directly, and we'll pick up on some of those towards the end. So look, thanks for letting me share that. And I'm going to now handball over to Sarah.
Thanks, James. And I hope somebody got a screenshot of James with his umbrella. That was a great analogy. It will stick with me. And thanks for reminding us about the future destination, that perfect hope that actually changes how we view our anxieties now. Perfect hope amongst panicky moments. I love it. Well, as James said, I'm Sarah. I'm married to Josh, who is the lead pastor at Laneway Church. I'm a mum to 3 kids, and I'm a part-time GP. As a GP, I'm like an expert in nothing, but I dabble in many things. And so today's seminar is brought to you by some evidence-based medicine textbooks, training courses, but also just personal experience from many interactions with anxious patients and a bit of anecdotal stuff as well. So basically take whatever is useful for you and make it your own. You'll see in the chat, there's a handout there, and it may be really useful to use that and even have a pen ready. We're going to go through really fast, quite a lot of content tonight. So grab whatever is relevant for you, and it might be worthwhile making a note of the things that really stand out that you want to take away. Well, where are we going? We're going to look firstly at anxiety in a general sense, in the way that it affects us all. And we'll think a little bit about the specific ways we've each felt its touch during the pandemic. Then I'm going to briefly touch on the more extreme end of the spectrum. These are anxiety disorders. We're going to talk about what they look and feel like, how they occur, and we're going to dispel some of the common myths around them. But then we're going to go broader again and help us all to consider how we can engage our anxieties as they pop up and where to find real, deep, lasting help. And then how we can in turn help others. That phrase that I used just then, engage our anxieties, is really the big takeaway of where we're going tonight. So firstly, let's start by understanding the times. Let's understand what's been happening to our bodies a lot recently. As Rick said at the start, at its heart, anxiety is a euphemism for fear. That's how I'm going to be using both of those words tonight, fairly interchangeably. By fear, I mean the thought that something that you love is under threat and that the future poses a risk of loss for you. But fear isn't just a thought. It happens in your whole body. You might be familiar with the concept of adrenaline and the flight or fight response. Well, here's an example of how fear feels. Imagine that you're on your way to a job interview in the city. You're heading in to catch the train, you've got your briefcase, you've got your resume, everything's ready to go and your tie's on. You're heading to catch the train, but when you're about 100 meters away, you hear the whistle. The train's pulling into the station. Immediately, your body responds. 2 hormones get released, cortisol and adrenaline. Cortisol diverts blood from less necessary organs and it sends it to your heart. Adrenaline gets your body ready to respond quickly. Your heart races, your legs race, you puff, you think fast, you act fast, you get there on time. Phew. And then you relax and you recover. But then imagine the train gets going and you think you'll be okay and you'll make your interview, but then it begins to slow and then it stops. And there's an announcement that there will be a delay. You suddenly think you might miss your interview and your body responds again. Your heart starts to race, you start puffing, your thoughts race and snowball, your gut churns, you tremble and fidget, but this time you're helpless to change anything. It's hard for your body to know what to do. You don't need to run anywhere. You just have to wait, feeling awful until the situation changes. Yuck. This is the experience that our bodies have been under in a lockdown. Initially, adrenaline and cortisol were really useful. For the first few days of any of our lockdowns, our 6 or whatever we've done, you needed to be in crisis management mode, making quick transitions to working from home, sourcing enough groceries and toilet paper, dealing with new homeschooling rules, checking in on others, think fast, act fast, sleep less. But then the train just stops. And for much of the last 2 years, we've been feeling stuck on the train, waiting for some sense of normal, waiting for relief, waiting for travel or reunions or rest. We are waiting in that moment of threat, or more accurately, multiple threats. There's actually been many threatening things happening to us recently. There's the threat of the virus itself, of conflict around vaccines, of friends in suffering, the threat of lost finances, of things getting cancelled, the threat of growing tension within your marriage or your family, or the threat that your kids are suffering. Big things that you care about have been under threat, and hormones have been keeping your body ready to act. Take a moment to consider your own personal experience of living in anxiety recently. How has that manifested for you? You may have been taking longer to get to sleep, have had a lower appetite, felt fidgety or like you've had a coffee, or you get that big adrenaline rush that just hits you randomly. Maybe your hair is falling out. Maybe your skin is broken and itchy, or your gut is playing up. Word finding and creativity might be an issue. It probably takes longer to make simple decisions. It might be hard to think of what to pray, how to reply to an email, or what to write on a card. This is your body's hormones responding to uncertainty and the fear of future loss. This is what anxiety feels like. And we've all been experiencing this to some degree. Now, the reason I start here is because it's good to begin by recognizing in ourselves the way anxiety works. This is going to help us to, number one, deal with it well so that we can find real comfort that lasts. And number two, have a point of shared contact, shared experience rather, with those who are anxious around us so that we can most effectively offer real comfort. Well, now that we've seen the common everyman experience, let's look at the more extreme version that we know of as anxiety disorders. Here's what it looks like in the extreme. This is more than unpleasantness and a bit of a mental fog, and it doesn't so easily come and go as circumstances change. The person who's suffering from an anxiety disorder is likely to feel fearful whether the train is moving or not. This is a group of disorders. I'm going to throw these up. It's a bit of a med student slide that you're about to see. You remember that I mentioned there's a number of anxiety disorders. Here's the top few. They're all things that manifest as anxious feelings, but they're slightly nuanced. And I'm going to talk about them in a general sense. What I want you to know as you just look at this list is that in Australia right now, during the pandemic, we suspect that these are affecting about 1 in 4 Australians. Outside of a pandemic year, it's usually about 1 in 7, but you can see it's almost double what we would normally be seeing. About 1 in 4 Australians has an anxiety disorder right now. Okay, so there's 3 key things I want you to know to take away from tonight about anxiety disorders. The first, I want you to know about the key difference. What's the basic difference between anxiety, the thing that we all feel stuck on the train, versus an anxiety disorder? Well, the key difference is that anxiety disorders are persistent and disabling. Persistent and disabling. Persistent meaning that the feelings don't substantially go away when the trigger is removed. People stay feeling anxious no matter roughly what changes. And disabling meaning that the symptoms are severe enough to inhibit your ability to attend to your everyday tasks. Okay, so who is most likely to develop an anxiety disorder? Well, there are some common predisposing factors that predispose to any of the anxiety disorders. I'm going to go through these one by one. I'm going to throw up a few little comments as we go. These things might strike you as relevant in your context or to someone that you care about, and taking notes might be a bit useful later. So first predisposing factor is genetics. It's just good to recognize some people are just genetically vulnerable to developing an anxiety disorder. Secondly, past trauma. Past trauma wires the brain to respond to stress differently. And anxiety disorder is really common after a traumatic event, especially one that happens during childhood. And as a little aside thought, if you have friends with anxiety disorders, it's good to consider that they might have experienced trauma in the past, and they're going to need a particular kind and listening ear and a safe space. Personality traits. To name a few of them, perfectionistic, narcissistic, dependent. These are medical terms. They're not meant as mean labels. For some people, their sense of identity and security is unstable. Again, it's usually from childhood trauma. For these people, the challenges of life, and especially of relationships, are just a whole lot harder. People with this kind of pressure in life will be finding the pandemic very difficult. They're probably really hurting, and they're possibly also hurting others. Be compassionate, be patient. They need a whole lot of love. Other medical conditions, especially chronic diseases, so heart disease, sleep disorders, diabetes, chronic pain, just to name a few. Physical and mental health are so closely intertwined, and for some people, just keeping their body going is hard work at the best of times. So it's really good to have a think about those around you who are always battling with their health. And remember to ask about their mental health, especially right now. Also, if you suffer from a chronic medical condition, do take care because your mental health is more vulnerable. Substance abuse. This is huge, and I wish I had more time for this one. We need to link substance abuse with anxiety disorders in our minds. The two very often go together. And so tonight we're reducing the stigma and increasing the conversation about anxiety disorders. We want to do the same with substance disorders. And by that I mean alcohol, narcotics, illicit drugs. Do talk with your friends more about these things. Pregnancy and childbirth. Parents, you get this. It's a no-brainer. Being a mum tends to involve some degree of trauma, sleep deprivation, pain, identity challenges, financial distress, social isolation, and the constant threat of loss of someone you love very deeply. We need to look after new mums. And finally, here's the big one. Prolonged stressful situation. Any stress, physical, mental, situation change, anything lasting more than 4 weeks will predispose to developing an anxiety disorder. Now, this is meant to be setting off alarm bells for us all right now. Does anybody know of any recent stressors that might have been going on for more than 4 weeks? The reason I say this is because we need to recognize we are living in a pandemic of anxiety disorders. And I say all of this because if any of these things are you, then you have an increased risk of developing an anxiety disorder. If you already know that you have an anxiety disorder, I want you to look at this list because you probably have a few of these things going on. And I want you to hear one thing loud and clear. If you have an anxiety disorder, it's not your fault. It is a product of these triggers causing a reaction of heightened stress in your body. It's not your fault. To develop this idea even deeper, I want to talk about the common chemical cause that's undergirding all anxiety disorders. You've seen the common factors that predispose to an anxiety disorder. There's also a common chemistry going on. Now, we don't actually understand this very well in medicine. We're still learning. But what we know is it is chemical. Anxiety disorders are about hormones and neurotransmitters and other cool words like serotonin resistance. Basically, with any of the above triggers that I mentioned, the body can get resistant to its own mood regulating hormones, and then it gets chemically trapped into a heightened stress state. It's really important to understand that this is a chemical disease, and it's the reason why people can't just change or snap out of it or get a grip. And it's why it's immensely unhelpful to suggest that they should. From these points above, I hope you can see that we're dispelling some myths around anxiety disorders. In one way, anxiety is a continuum of mild anxiety through to persistent and disabling, which is anxiety disorders. And it's something that we all experience. We all sit somewhere along this. And it's good to use this season to realize we have a shared experience that we can talk about and tap into and use to relate to one another. However, there is a difference between anxiety and anxiety disorders, and it is dangerous to confuse them. In an anxiety disorder, people are chemically stuck in that pervasive and disabling state of fear. Some people, perhaps your friends, someone in your household, a parent, or a teen that you care for, are stuck in fear. And maybe your attempts to help them haven't seemed like they've worked. This can be frustrating and confusing and distressing for both parties. Please do understand that people suffering from an anxiety disorder aren't to blame. They're not weak-minded or lazy. And don't imagine they can just stop worrying. And just because you don't have one, it doesn't mean you're smarter or stronger. I hope that this helps us to be compassionate, patient, kind, and to love one another well. Now, here's some good news. This is still an emerging field, but anxiety disorders seem to be quite treatable. Both medication and psychology are fairly equally effective over time at changing brain chemistry. I'm not going to go into the treatments for anxiety disorders right now, but feel free to ask more in question time. I've put some resources in the handout for us. But suffice it for now to say that where there is an anxiety disorder, that pervasive and disabling form of anxiety, there is a need for professional support. It's a chemical condition. It puts an enormous strain on the body, and it does need some medical support. To summarize all of this so far, it's chemical. It's not your fault. You can't just stop, and it does need medical support. However, this in no way replaces or negates the deeper needs. This is something that James was touching on. The more long-lasting needs of addressing our fears. Because even in the pathological extreme, anxiety is still a feeling, fear, for which the Bible richly gives us everything we need for comfort. In the rest of the time, what I want to do is go back to anxiety in the broader sense and show a general way that we can approach it for ourselves and for anyone we care for. So let's begin with the typical way that we approach our anxieties. Our bodies are super sophisticated systems with lots of feedback systems wired to avoid pain. That's why we put on shoes to go outside, use oven mitts to handle a hot tray, or take our first sip of tea carefully. We don't want to feel pain, and so we go to great lengths to avoid it. Now, fear is a particularly painful emotion because of the way it feels in our body, that adrenaline effect. It's horrible feeling nervous. Our brains would prefer to avoid, suppress, and distract from it. We call this avoidant behaviors. Crossing the road to avoid your neighbor's dog, that's an avoidant behavior. Checking Facebook instead of writing your essay, that's an avoidant behavior. And the more intense the anxiety, the more extreme the behavior needs to be to mask it. But where you have extreme anxieties, you will find extreme behaviors, addictions, pornography, addiction to video games, excessive gambling or alcoholism. These are avoidant behaviors. They are filling your mind with some other strong emotion to distract from the unpleasant feeling of anxiety, because feeling anxious is so unpleasant to us. I keep wanting us to see, firstly, where this lands for us. Anxiety is so prevalent right now. We have all been stuck on the train, living in uncertainty with things that we love under threat. And because our brains are wired to avoid pain, I think it's probable that we will all be exhibiting some avoidant behaviors right now. They might be subtle. What might some of yours be? Now, there are 3 big issues with this way of coping, and I use 2 really cute analogies to move my patients from avoiding to engaging. The first issue is, if we avoid the anxiety, it's still there and it makes us sick. So whilst the fear is unfaced, unnamed, unprocessed, it's still affecting our bodies with adrenaline and our minds. We wrongly think we can put our anxieties in a file in our brain and close the file and close the drawer. But the brain doesn't actually work like that. Our brain isn't like an office full of neat boxes and files. Avoiding our anxieties is a little bit like holding a beach ball underwater. Did you ever do that when you were a kid? And it's like we're pretending that it's not there. It takes energy to keep the fear out of your consciousness. It takes energy from other things that the mind could be fruitful with. That's why people who are stressed seem distracted. It's why they find it hard to focus. And it's why they feel so tired. The mind is spending energy suppressing pain. That's not all. I'm sorry. Untreated anxiety has a long-term effect on the body as well. Heart disease, diabetes, and even cancer is more prevalent in the context of untreated anxiety. It is better to let the beach ball rise to the surface. This has been a lot of my workload as a GP recently, helping people to see that they're wrestling beach balls that they're not aware of. My husband actually prefers for me to use the analogy that it's like trying to hold in a fart. That's how we explain it to our kids, and that's got a lot of traction with them. So feel free to use that with your kids too. The second issue that we find with avoiding our anxiety is that it misses an opportunity for growth. An opportunity to grow in knowing ourselves, in knowing more of God, in turning from idols, and in knowing that true peace that only comes through Jesus. And in so doing, in offering real comfort to other people. Indulge me in an analogy that I use with my patients. It's a bit like moving house. You know, when you move house, you get everything in the door, but you've not really fully settled in until everything is unpacked. Imagine not unpacking the last huge box full of important tools, like the Allen keys are probably in there. But instead, leaving it right in the middle of the hallway. It's pointless there. It's in the way of the smooth running of the household. It's hard to find anything, to entertain friends, or just to relax in the home. It's distressing, distracting. It needs unpacking. Unpacking it is hard work. It takes some mental heavy lifting and time, but once it's done, the whole place benefits. Every activity in the house runs smoother and more efficiently. The house is a more peaceful place to be. And once it's unpacked, the actual contents of the box can be useful and even appreciated. Anyway, unpacking anxiety is always worth doing. Now I'm going to add a third issue here. This is perhaps a little tangent, but I've been thinking about what I see at work recently with the anxieties that are coming up for my patients at the moment surrounding the pandemic. I think that there's a bigger or maybe deeper story of fear going on for a lot of us. A huge beach ball deep down below the surface. You might all know what I'm talking about. This is the one thing we don't want to talk about because it is the ultimate threat of the ultimate loss. It's lonely, it's painful, and for every single one of us, it is inevitable. Surely the fear of death is the most unpleasant and intense feeling. And I think that all of our fears that we feel, all anxious fears, are like a tiny echo or whisper, reminding us of that final unavoidable loss. I see this in my patients' eyes every day. Just on Monday, I had a patient, I saw him for his neck pain. This was the third time he'd come in. He's got a bit of a muscle spasm in his neck. I've seen him 3 times in the last 3 months. I went over all the same stuff that we'd already discussed, and then he whispered, "It's not something else, is it?" And I realized that this poor man had spent the last few months thinking that he was dying, but he couldn't even bring himself to direct that to his doctor. Death is truly the most terrifying thought. For many, life can become all about holding that beach ball down. We focus on living life to the fullest, trying to be the most successful, happy, well-traveled, home-owning, family-building, legacy-leaving, fulfilled versions of ourselves to distract from the horror of the inevitability of death at the end. Romans 8 in the Bible describes it as being a slave to the fear of death. And I think the pandemic has certainly brought this big fear closer to the surface. Friend, if this is you, I'm sorry. That is an awful burden to be dealing with. And let me plead with you then. This is the point 3, I'm finally getting to it. Avoidance of the fear of death will not satisfy. Don't stay a slave to fear. Let the fear rise to the surface and bring it to Jesus. Romans 8 goes on to say that those who come to Jesus are freed from the slavery of fear. Just imagine. So don't avoid your fears. Here's a better way that we can deal with our fears. A life-changing discovery for me was when I no longer saw painful emotions as threats, but actually as tools or opportunities. We're made by a very wise and kind God, and so emotions are given to us as a good gift. They move us to see something about ourselves and our world. So anxiety can actually be a tool, an opportunity for insight. So what is anxiety trying to reveal to us? Well, it says something I love is under threat. And so we can examine our anxiety and learn about what we love. We can think, when I'm afraid or anxious, what am I loving? What is it that I value that I'm trying to protect? When we unpack the box of tools or let the beach ball rise, we don't just feel anxious. We actually discover great insights into our hearts. We discover what's dearest to us, treasures, idols, things about ourselves and our world that were once undiscernible to us. Can I suggest this approach? This book, Untangling Emotions, it's in your handout. This is a great book for 2021. And it suggests this simple approach as we unpack our anxiety. First of all, it says to engage. This is simply stopping as we notice our anxiety in our minds or bodies. We might notice that feeling in our chest or the way our expression has changed. We might notice our pulse or our hands fidgeting. And instead of pulling away, pushing the beach ball back down, leaning towards it, letting it rise into your consciousness, letting the beach ball come to the surface, or opening the lid of the box to peer inside. It's as simple as just thinking to yourself, stop. I think I'm feeling anxious about something. Remember, there's a treasure in there. Engage, lean in, get inquisitive. Don't avoid. Secondly, examine. This is bringing the magnifying glass out, not just at the fear itself, but deeper into what is being loved. You're trying to get to the bottom of what your heart's loving, what it's trying to protect. So you just ask yourself, what am I loving? What am I trying to protect? Thirdly, evaluate. We've discovered what we love. Now we evaluate it. Is this an appropriate thing to love and value? Now, if you're a Christian, you have a great resource here, the Bible, as James said. We use the Bible to shine a light into the dark bits of our hearts that we can't usually see. The Bible is useful for evaluating what we're loving. As we think about what we're loving, we think about the truth of the Bible, we might discover that our hearts are divided, that we actually love in a disordered way. We might see things that we need to confess and put off. Another word the Bible uses for that is idols. Or we might actually find clarity in seeing that the things we love are God-honoring good loves that need to be affirmed. The fourth thing is action. I've seen myself, what's in my heart more clearly. I've seen the light of the Bible shone into the hard to see bits of me. So what do I need to confess? What good loves do I need to stir up? What do I pray for? What do I put off? What are some brave actions to take? Josh and I have been doing this 4-part exercise during our Tuesday night date nights recently. Psychology date nights. This is an example of one. I engaged with my anxiety about how I'm feeling delivering this seminar to you. I wrote down my initial just how am I feeling? So I engaged, I evaluated, I examined the things that I am loving, which is the bits in circles. I evaluated them, that's the red bits, worked out, in light of God's word, are these good fears to be, good loves to be stirring up, or do I need to put some things off? And then I worked out some actions from there. I tell you, it frees up my heart and my head. Can you see that avoidance is a vain hope? The anxiety remains, the adrenaline continues, your body suffers, you miss the tools and the opportunity to grow. It does not satisfy. It can't bring comfort. But in engaging our fears, in light of scripture, we gain significant and lasting comfort. We gain spiritual refinement. And thirdly, we gain something rich with which to comfort others. And that's where we're going to spend the rest of our time. So how can you care for others well in anxious times? I'm going to say 3 things. Be self-aware, self-care, and care for others. First of all, self-awareness. Caring for others must start with your own awareness of yourself. You're under some stress at the moment. How are you going in noticing your anxiety? How is it affecting your body? How are you going listening to the clues that you're feeling anxious? What are some ways you've been avoiding feeling anxious? How is it affecting your work, your relationships, your prayers, your big life decisions, your marriage, and your parenting? What is it revealing to you about what you love? The more you find comfort from God in addressing your own anxiety, the more you're going to gain rich insights of compassion and comfort with which to comfort others. Secondly, self-care. This is the bit where I say all the stuff that you knew I was going to say. Exercise, eat good, go to bed. So I don't need to say that stuff, but instead, let me explain why you need those things. You need those things because you need to deal with the adrenaline. Remember, adrenaline is the thing that puts a strain on your body. It affects your mind's processing. It reduces your ability to concentrate, to remember, to problem solve. And it's processed in one of two ways. Either it takes time circulating around your body, gradually being broken down, but affecting your nerves and your gut and your heart along the way, or you burn it using your big muscles. It's one or the other. The more stress there is for you, the more important it is to exercise. Repeat that to yourself. The more stress, the more exercise you need. Here's some numbers. If you give yourself 30 minutes of moderate intensity exercise per day, you'll be feeling somewhat better within 2 weeks. If you do 1 hour of exercise a day, it's equivalent to being on an antidepressant for your mood. You have to exercise, or your body will wear out and your mental health will suffer. Next, meditate on the Creator and create. Neurophysiology is far more complex than we can understand, especially when it comes to creativity. But here's something that I think is going on here. When we're stressed, the creative parts of our brain are suppressed. That's word finding, problem solving, imagining. They're just harder when we're stressed. Exercising the creative part of our brain seems to help to process painful emotions, and it also develops our empathy, which we're going to get to in a moment. 2 things can help. The first is meditating on the Creator. There's a little bit written in secular psychiatry about the virtues of regular time outdoors. It seems to lift our perspectives. As a Christian, it provides inspiration for praise. So when you're anxious, go outside. If your friend is anxious, take them for a walk. The other part is being creative. Music, art, gardening, these things work a creative part of the brain and sort of wake it up. This is a picture, probably a really distracting picture, of me neatly combining all of my self-care activities. I've got a new bike and I like to ride around and pick wildflowers and then arrange them and take photos of them. Thirdly, care for others. In caring for others, we're not reinventing the wheel. Whatever is helpful for you is helpful for them. So help them to engage their anxiety. If you engage in their anxious thoughts, they're going to engage in their anxious thoughts because you've created a safe space. Help the beach ball to come up. Help them to unpack the box. There's a little thought with this. I think just the same as with your own pain, our instinct is going to be to avoid their anxious thoughts. If we don't like to feel our own anxieties, then chances are we don't want other people to feel them either because we feel threatened by them. I think we can, if we're not careful, slip into anxiously caring for others by helping them to push their beach balls back down. That's not helpful. And I think many of us do this every day, me included. There can be a moment in a conversation that you're in where you sense that someone's anxious. Maybe somebody brings a prayer point at Bible study or shares about something they're facing, and everybody tries to help by pushing the beach ball back down. They might say, that'll probably never happen, or you'll be fine. We might even pray to that effect as well. Please, God, help them to feel better. Please, God, help the bad thing not happen. Now, these are not necessarily bad prayers, but we might be distracting from the real issue and creating a space where it's not easy to let the pain surface. Do we sometimes care for others by creating a culture of fear blocking? Can you see there's an opportunity there for a far richer moment of real comfort when you lean in? You might say, tell us more about what you're worried about. That's engaging. And you might mirror back to them, it sounds like you really love ... That's helping them to examine. Once their anxiety is engaged, the good news of comfort, which Jesus speaks of in Matthew 6, has a lot of traction as they see what they're loving and where they're placing their hope. And they see a better love and a greater hope. This is really the crux of things. Engage your own anxiety, being self-aware, practicing self-care, and then care for others by engaging with them in their anxiety. But here's just a few random thoughts that might be relevant for your contexts as things slowly open up around us. First of all, and just generally, be culture setters as we engage our anxiety. Be an advocate for addressing anxiety. Consider how in conversations and your Bible study groups, you can acknowledge your own fears and then model the engaging, examining, evaluating, act process. This is going to be such a great help for everyone around you. Secondly, for those who don't yet know Jesus, consider that big ultimate fear that holds us all captive, the fear of death. If this strikes a chord for you, you might consider doing three things. First of all, don't avoid this fear. Engage it by praying to God. It's really simple. You can just tell him, God, I'm scared of death. Please help me. Secondly, read about Jesus. He is the one key to no longer being a slave of fear. You can contact Laneway Church for more information by filling in a connect card from our website. We can walk you through it and send you out a Bible. And thirdly, chat to a friend. If there's someone who invited you tonight, ask them about their fear of death. You know, often things just make most sense when we hear them from a friend that we trust. So do go to them. Next is suspect avoidant behaviours, particularly addictions. If you haven't already worked this out, pornography is absolutely rife right now, as are the other online addictions like gambling, addiction to gaming, or even just addiction to social media. As a GP, I'm also seeing a lot of binge eating or just unhealthy comfort eating, and of course, alcoholism. Whether this is in yourself or in a friend, it's important to realize these are avoidant behaviors. So just challenging the behavior probably won't work. We need to engage with the anxiety that the behavior is there to deal with. Do reach out for professional help. And you can also connect with Laneway via our connect card on the website. Social anxiety. The other one that we're going to see as things open up is avoiding church and other ways of connecting because of social anxiety. This is going to be huge. And again, just challenging the behavior isn't going to work. We might say or think, I've got to go to church, it's good for me and it's loving for others. We need to lean into people's anxious hearts. A great question to be asking people is, how are you feeling being back in a crowd? If you yourself experience social anxiety, here's my quick tips for social anxiety. Number one is engage it by naming it out loud to God and to a trusted friend. Secondly, don't avoid. You will want to, and you might be in quite a habit of avoiding social contexts. Remember, that will not satisfy. That's a false comfort. Thirdly, do make it easier on yourself by bringing a buddy. You might organise beforehand to meet outside, enter in together, sit together, stay together, and leave together. Fourthly, pray on the way. You know, God knows that it's hard for you and he cares for you. So talk to him about it. And the fifth thing is, look for the lonely around you. Social anxiety itself is a lonely feeling. It's really easy to feel like you're the only one who feels this way and everybody is confident. But it's really common right now. You're not alone. And you are blessed with the gift of insight. So you have a special way to care for others. So when you're praying on the way, don't just pray for yourself. Pray for others who might be going to church feeling anxious. Pray that you can be a friend to them. Two more things. Firstly, be compassionate regarding vaccine and COVID opinions. We all have different loves and values. And so we make different decisions based on those loves and values. My fear of COVID might motivate me to get vaccinated, but somebody else's fear of political systems or of needles or of lack of control might make them choose something very different. Conversations around these different decisions need to start with compassion and caution. You might chat to someone who seems angry and hurt and defensive, but at the heart of them, they're probably scared, and rightly so. These are scary times and scary topics. So start the conversation by sharing and appreciating what you're both fearing and loving. And finally, embrace the mess. Don't always expect to see breakthroughs happen before your eyes. Don't always wait till your thoughts are super clarified before you pray at the end. Check out my thing that I did. You know, this was really helpful, but look at this. This is just about one, hour of my life, this seminar, and it's a mess because my mind is a mess. This always tends to be super messy because our fears have often been brewing for decades and intermingling with other feelings. It's rarely a case of step one, engage, step two, everything's clear, step three, pray, thanking God for this new clarity. Ultimately, our hope isn't in knowing ourselves perfectly. It's in the God who knows us. Psalm 139 really helps us here, and I pray this regularly when I'm feeling fearful. It might be a good one to pray before bed tonight, and I've put a link in the handout. Lord, you have searched me and you know me. That's incredible. I don't know myself. And it's okay that we're messy and we're hard to understand. Our hope is in the God who searches us and knows us and gently leads us. That really wraps it up. I've put at the end of the handout a few questions to help you to take this away and let it simmer. You might like to have a think through them and a chat with a friend or your Bible study group. There's also some resources for further info, along with a way to connect with leaders at Laneway Church. We're going to head into a question time. I'm happy to keep talking about these things or clarify anything further, but I'm going to hand back to James to lead us in prayer and finish up.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. I love listening to Sarah's wisdom and the rich tapestry of sources and ideas that weave together. Thanks for hanging in there, guys. We have gone over our time that we said. So I do just want to kind of settle it down for us, and then we will open up for some questions for those who want to. But for all of us, I want you to think about anxieties within you and anxieties around you. What has stood out to you as we've heard from the Bible, from personal experience, and from a more medical side? I wonder what stood out. How will you lean in and engage with your fears rather than avoid them? And how can you help others do the same? That's something for all of us to think about. Perhaps this night has just started a journey of you thinking about anxiety for yourself or for a friend, and you'd like to take some next steps. As Sarah said, there's plenty of options, and we want to make them available to you. In Sarah's handout, there are a number of resources suggested, some various mental health organisations, and a fact sheet from Beyond Blue. You can fill in the connect card. Now, this is something for Laneway Church, as in to connect with Laneway Church. You don't have to be part of our church to fill it in. We would love to hear a bit more about you. If you do fill that in, a trusted and appropriate leader will read that and get in touch with you. They can hear a bit more of your story. They can pray with you, and they can help connect you with some further steps. You might have come with a friend, and if you've come with a friend and you're like, I just got to talk about it a bit more, then tell your friend, I just want to talk more right now, and see where the conversation goes. I do want to say, though, that over the last 18 months, I've made plenty of calls to the Beyond Blue care line, and maybe someone could be kind enough to type this number in the chat. If someone just wants some immediate support outside of this context here, their number is 1300 22 4636. 1300 22 4636. And that's a care line. Or, of course, Lifeline is available at 131114. 131114. We hope that you can stick around for some questions and so on. If you want to fill in a connect card, you can, but I do just want to make those other phone lines available if that's something that's, better suited to you or what you'd like to do. So that kind of wraps up our night. I want you to know that you're well and truly free to go if you need to. We do want to have maybe 10 minutes of questions. I don't think there'll be a whole lot of time for that. But we still do want to engage with some of the questions. There's a few that's come through, but please keep sending them through to me along the way. Oh, look, Sarah's put those numbers in the phone. That's fantastic. Look, maybe I can start with it. So sorry, just again to reiterate, feel free to hang around. We're going to engage in some questions that have come through to me. You're welcome to send some more through. But yeah, we'll jump into those now. So big breath. Thanks for hanging out. It's been awesome. Okay, here's a question, Sarah, that's probably best suited for you. Rick and Sarah and I will try to field these. And there was just a question around particular medication recommendations for anxiety. Sarah, I don't know if you've got any things that you consider as a GP when you're prescribing. I can say from my own experience that I was on one for a while, and it caused what's called emotional blunting, where basically I couldn't feel sort of highs or lows, and it was pretty awful. So I changed to a different one, but it's a bit of trial and error. So that was my experience. But as a GP, do you have any thoughts on going about what you would prescribe or not prescribe?
Yes. Yep. So the question, it wasn't about medication or not, it was which medication is that?
For anxiety.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what a GP is probably thinking when you go and see them. First of all, they're just going to make sure that they've got the diagnosis right. There are a lot of things that can masquerade as anxiety disorders, like anemia, thyroid disease, and so they're going to do a whole lot of bloods. They're going to work out what else is going on, like blood pressure, kidneys, various other things. They're going to work out what you've tried before, because James used that helpful phrase, trial and error. It's not that you are a trial person. These aren't trial drugs, but everybody's body is a little different and does respond differently. So that's all the kind of the decision-making process initially. Then there's a few different classes of medications. We call them antidepressants. Don't be confused by that. Anxiety and depression, same chemical cause, you know, the serotonin stuff I mentioned, and James mentioned they go together. So we call them antidepressants, but some of them are particularly good for certain forms of anxiety, and it does depend on which one. So generalized anxiety disorders, panic disorders, PTSD, in all of the trials with these medications in the past, some have risen to be particularly good for a particular anxiety disorder, OCD being another one that like needs quite a tailored response. So it really depends on your diagnosis. But basically, again, just to dispel a few myths, the classes that we reach for initially are 70% of people will respond well to the first one we try. So it's not like, oh, it probably won't work, so I shouldn't bother. It probably will work. It's just a case of working out what the diagnosis is. And sometimes there's particular symptoms like insomnia that we want to troubleshoot. And so some of them have some useful side effects of, you know, sleep or, you know, helping to manage various other symptoms. So it's trial and error in one way, but it's usually fairly effective the first time. And it also depends on the diagnosis. I hope that's been helpful. It's not an easy one size fits all approach.
That's good. Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. Here's a question that may be useful for yourself, Rick, and or Sarah. You know, just as everyday kind of friends and carers, how do we know when we're out of our depth in helping someone and when we should refer them on? What are some things that go through your mind as you think about that?
Yeah, thanks. It's a really helpful question. I think, as Sarah said, there's things that we can all do. There's care of others that all of us can engage in to a certain degree, and then there will be things that are beyond us. But even for when people will benefit from a particular type of care, from my personal experience, I don't think anyone in that position doesn't benefit from a friend who is willing to walk alongside them and to talk about it. And so I think from my experience, I think it's a both and, that we love, talk with, pray with people. But then if there are things that seem more significant than we were able to do with, we continue to do that and maybe suggest that someone go talk to their GP. That's something that is usually my process, but then I continue to do all those same things along that process. That's from mine. Sarah, is there anything you'd add to that?
Absolutely, that's what I'd say. You might feel out of your depth, but you never, what's the word? Word finding.
Must be that adrenaline.
You're never unnecessary.
Yeah.
That there is always a role for you to stick close, especially as just someone who keeps on saying, engage your anxiety, and creating a safe space for that, being someone who prays for your friend and who holds out God's word. So you might feel out of your depth, but you're never unnecessary. The helpful phrase, I think, is persistent and disabling. If you just take that away as a key, I think my friend's feelings of anxiety seem to be persistent and disabling. Bing. Not warning sign, don't panic, but help and encourage them that it's probably more complex. There's probably a degree of stuck chemistry here. There may be past trauma. It's going to be complex enough to need some medical attention as well.
It's good. Persistent and disabling. And I think, Sarah, that was your kind of key to understanding that while there's a spectrum of anxiety, the disorders are defined by those two things.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good. I had a really good question here. I'm not sure where we'll throw it, so Sarah and or Rick, but just thinking about avoidant behaviours, things like overworking, is that an avoidant behaviour? Do we still engage with our anxieties if the avoidant behaviour is doing a good thing, like working? Yeah, just love to get your thoughts on that.
Sarah, can I throw to you first for the avoidant behaviour bit?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, look, there is a special word for when there's an avoidant behaviour that seems productive. So excessive physical exercise, or really strictly healthy eating, or working really hard at something. Basically, if it is an avoidant behaviour, it is not productive. Okay, I'll say it again. If it is an avoidant behaviour, it is not productive. Okay. It might seem productive. You might feel really good about it. And that's the whole thing about these avoidant behaviours, is you feel better when you do them. But yes, be very careful. And if you think you are doing something like that, look, you know, some addictions are really going to harm you physically very quickly and destroy some relationships along the way. Some aren't going to look like that, but we still need to be careful. And as I said, avoiding the anxiety is never productive.
Yep, that's helpful. I can't remember if there was a second part to that question. From
yeah, just about work, I guess. And it's a good thing. Work is a good thing, but maybe you've covered that already, Sarah.
And I think, the only other thing that I might like to add is we see the same thing in the Bible, is that a good thing, given all of our love and time and focus, can actually become a bad thing. That's the kind of the key of what Jesus teaches us, and why that's so important, is that the number one thing in our life we keep needing to come back to, and I need my heart to keep coming back, is to remember actually God is more important than this good thing. And so even good things in all categories, if they take all of our focus, for all of us, will be unhealthy for us.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep.
Fantastic. Yeah, nice. I'm gonna have one lucky last question. Sarah, I think I asked you this recently. You said about utilizing your big muscles, and I thought, well, what if my muscles are puny? So what are my big muscles?
Yeah, you want words? So biceps, triceps, quads, glutes, hamstrings.
Okay.
We're not talking about fishing. You've got to, legs are great for it, but arms as well.
Great.
Why? Can't remember. I'm going to pull the GP card and say I'm going to go look that up somewhere.
That's great. Yeah, using those big muscles. That's fantastic. Awesome. I have so enjoyed the reflections from Matthew 6, the in-depth, integrated thinking from you, Sarah. Thank you for your questions, everyone. And I'm really glad that you could not only be here, but engage with it. We really hope that it's done a few things. It's opened up some conversations. It's given you some understanding about anxiety for yourself and for others. It might have piqued some interest about Jesus, and that might be a first thing for you, or that might be you've never really thought about bringing your anxiety to Jesus, even if you already follow him. That is a great thing. Bring all of it to him. So, guys, we're going to wrap it up there. Obviously, this has been recorded, and so in time, you'll be able to access it again. There might be certain things that you want to re-listen to, watch again, look over your notes, stay connected. Do reach out if you need to fill in that connect card, or chat to a friend, or ring one of those lines. But it's been really great having you along. What a privilege it is that we can meet and discuss and dispel myths and bring ourselves focused on the God who meets us in anxiety. So have a great night. Someone's just put there the Connect form again. If you want the Connect card, use that. I'm going to hang around for a few minutes in case people just, feel like hanging around. But otherwise, we are done. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Sarah. And guys, it's been great. Catch you later. We might turn the record.